Knowing what frame rate to use for a project or a scene is the fundamentals of any cinematographer. When the right frame rate is chosen, it's more than just a shot, it tells a story. But how do you even choose the correct frame rate, and where do you even start? In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how you can do that by talking about the fundamentals of frame rates and how to choose it in any scenario. Before we even answer the question, what frame rate should I be filming in, we have to understand two things. Understand what you are shooting, as well as the effects of different frame rates that you choose. With these two fundamentals understood, you will know exactly what frame rate to choose in any situation. So let's talk about frame rates. Whether you're a videographer or a cinematographer, context is everything, especially when it comes to frame rates. The biggest misconception that people have when choosing a frame rate is that you can just shoot at the highest and slow it down when you need to. This is wrong and unfortunately something I used to do. The reason why this is wrong because motion blur that is captured at higher frame rate when played back at a normal speed isn't the same when you film at 24 frames per second. The biggest thing you have to ask yourself when choosing a frame rate is, what am I shooting and do I want this to be slowed down in post? Asking yourself this question before you shoot anything will set you up for success. This is being intentional with your work and what you are shooting. And it is the main difference between a videographer and a cinematographer. With context out of the way, we can start diving into frame rates and exactly what they will do for each of your shots. The frame rates we're going to be talking about are 24, 60, 120, and 240. The reason I selected these frame rates is this is what the Sony FX3 is capable of and most mirrorless cameras. In addition, these are frame rates that I use to shoot a lot of our commercials. The gold standard and what you should be shooting for the most naturalistic feeling is 24 frames per second. This varies region to region, so check where you live and what the standard is specifically for that. Shooting at 24 frames per second is going to give you the most naturalistic motion blur comparable to what the human eye sees. Anything lower or higher, it becomes more obvious. This is used for narrative, interviews, commercials, and basically anything that has to feel natural. When it comes to slowing down moments and making things feel cinematic, this is when we start to go into slow motion and higher frame rates. 60 frames per second is the go-to whenever you want something to have more emphasis. You want the viewer to focus on the action and feel something. With 60 frames per second, you're achieving that as well as making things feel more elevated and almost like dreamlike. This is commonly used for B-roll, hero shots of characters, big emotions, or where you want to slow down time and want the viewer to sit in it for a while. For example, this is done in a lot of music videos. And if you shoot a performance at 24 frames per second, it's a great addition to shoot the same scene without any singing at 60 frames per second. This just adds to the moment as well as capturing the emotions of the person performing so you can cut to it in post. As we start looking anything past 60 frames per second, these are high-speed frame rates and these are used for special cases. If we look at 120 frames per second, this should be reserved for fast-moving subjects as well as elements. You use this when you want to almost stop time, and this is most effective with large movements like you see in sports. I like to think that anything that can't be captured in 24 frames per second due to motion blur is suitable for 120 frames per second. Things like people sprinting on a track, waves crashing against rocks, cereal being poured from a container, or emotions where you want to stop time. One example of this is a recent commercial where we wanted the viewer to feel distress and isolation that the character was going through. This was a big moment in the commercial, and we knew that we wanted to slow it down and almost stop time with a big camera flash that went off. We shot this at 110 frames per second due to the limitations of the camera, but this could be easily shot at 120. But we knew this beforehand because we asked ourselves that question if we wanted to be slowed down, and as well as just being intentional with our work. Now that we are moving past 120 frames per second and go to 240, 500, or even 1000 frames per second, these are frame rates reserved for specialized work. This includes high-speed product or food work, as well as Hollywood movies or commercials where they want to stop time. I see this used a lot when there's a lot of elements that are moving and almost like particle-like things that you need to capture at super slow motion. For example, we used a high-speed camera for a cereal commercial to have an emphasis on the product moving through the air. This had a lot of particles and elements that were better shown off in super slow motion. So, in summary, 24 frames per second is used to capture the most naturalistic movement of a subject. 30 to 60 frames per second is used to emphasize someone's emotion or the importance of a scene. 120 frames per second is used for fast-moving objects or people and almost to stop time. 240 frames per second and above is used to stop time and generally for product and studio work. This is a general guideline when choosing a frame rate for a specific shot, but ultimately stop and ask yourself, What are you shooting? I hope this helps for when you're shooting your next project. Subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video.